parts. Because if you have to send away for things that are broken or that you need, you've got to send to Europe. And it takes 6 months for your order to get there by sailing ship. Leaves here. When it leaves here, it goes to Hawaii first, which would be a nice stop, and then all the way down around the tip of South America and back. And then they would pick up the trade goods, turn around after 2 or 3 weeks, and go back the other way. So 6 months to get back here. So if your ladle broke or something broke and you didn't have a blacksmith, you were in trouble. The blacksmith would try and fix it. And this is the tool that a blacksmith uses, because a blacksmith is a tool maker. So everything that you see here, I make. That's what a blacksmith's job is. It's to make everybody's tools. And that could be nails for a carpenter. It could be beaver traps for a trapper, candle holders, branding irons, coffee pots, all of my own tools, hammers and tongs, you name it. Made by a blacksmith, they had to make it or fix it. As long as it wasn't pretty. If it was pretty, they couldn't do it. I've actually had to make something very interesting recently. This hook, which some of you might recognize from a movie, a Disney movie. Does anybody recognize this? From Moana? It's called a Maui hook, or a Matua hook, I believe. And I'm making them, which seems like that's a funny thing for me to be making here at the fort. But when this place was running in the 19th century, there's about 24 men who work in here, or who work in the fort. And at least 6 of them were Hawaiian. So they were born. So the Hudson's Bay Company hired about almost a quarter of their men on the Pacific slope here were of Hawaiian descent because of that journey where they passed by and the Hawaiians came here. And in May, we are having a luau to celebrate the Hawaiian men that were here. And they've asked me to make this ceremonial style of hook. So I'm making hooks like this as well. So it just could be anything that you would require here at the fort. All made with this tool. Does anyone know what that's called? Do you know what that is? What is it? It is, you're right, that's coal that I'm burning, and a lot of people don't recognize that. It's this. This is what I'm burning, coal, right there. I could burn charcoal, but I'm burning coal. They burn coal here. They ship their coal from England, as along with the iron. There's coal everywhere here, but they didn't bother looking. But do you know what the name of the tool is? This whole big thing. It looks just like a pile of bricks and a kind of messy and dirty. And it's an odd fireplace. It's called a forge. So when you hear the word forge, that's what a forge is. It's this, and it only has a few things in it. It has somewhere to burn charcoal, and it has to have air blow into it. Because if you don't blow air through charcoal or this, it's not hot enough. Because steel has to be really hot before it becomes soft. And I've just got this bracket here that I'm making for that. I'll straighten it out a little bit. I don't have a lot to do on this one at the moment, so we'll just straighten this out and then I'll just flatten out a little bit. I'm doing some design work on that stool right now, and it'll take me a while to get my design absolutely perfect. And once I do, then I'll make a bunch of tools to make sure that I can make more and more and more of them. But I'm just kind of testing. So I'm just making these brackets. They'll kind of go like that, and then they'll hold the stool top and safe. So I need 3 of them, so I'll finish that. But this stuff is super, super hot. And if I put metal in the fire, like I have a scrap here, this was kind of called nail stock at the time. It was used for all sorts of different things. I can heat it up and it becomes really soft. So anybody who has played or used clay, how many people have used clay? Tried to use clay? Plasticine, Play-Doh type of thing, yeah. If you've used that, you know what it is to be a blacksmith. Because a blacksmith, when it is hot, it's like clay, and I'm moving the metal around. So I'm not like, a blacksmith isn't like a modern metal worker. I'm not grinding it, well I do sometimes, but I don't like it. I'm not grinding it away or cutting it with a hacksaw or using a drill. I'm moving it around like it was a piece of clay. And I actually found some of my clay the other day. So a blacksmith uses, and I have plasticine. It's kind of like clay. If you haven't played with plasticine, you don't know what you're missing. And it comes in all sorts of different colors, but but any color that I use turns gray, so I always just use gray. So, and the reason I have it is because blacksmiths always had mud or dough. Because if I can make it out of this, I can make it out of steel. Because this is the same thing. So if I wanted to take this, if I took a piece of clay like this, and I said, I want to make a hook out of it, because I'm going to make, that's what I'll do. We'll make a hook out of that. I can pinch this to stretch it out, to make it longer. And that's exactly what a blacksmith does. If I have a piece of material and I want to stretch it longer, I do that. And I stretch it longer. I'll stretch a little bit of the hook out on the horn here. Here I'm using my fingers because I can touch it. When I'm a blacksmith, I can't touch it. So I stretch it out by hitting it between my hammer and my anvil. And that's like pinching it. So this is slightly curved, that's slightly curved. It's just like my fingers. So all of the shapes that you see here, all the things that I've made, have been made like they were out of pottery, except I can't touch it because it's too hot. It is really hot. And I'll show you how hot it is and it has to be hot. This is not the upper temperature that I use. In fact, that's almost getting a little cold and it's already that hot. Let me see if I can hold this. I gotta hold it a little tighter. So it's already that hot. Like there is immense heat in that. But that's not hot enough for me. I need it really hot. Because when it's really hot, if I can hold that in my hands, it's this soft. It moves just like this. And you'll see when I pull it out that I can move it just like this. So a blacksmith has to spend about 10 years learning to do what you already know how to do with your fingers. So blacksmiths aren't learning some skill that is like, whoa, how do they do that? You can already do this. You just have to learn, instead of having 10 fingers to shape this, you only got 2. This is your finger, that's your thumb. And you have to shape everything with your finger as your hammer and your thumb as your anvil. And from that, you make tools from iron and steel, using the forge to heat it up so that it's soft. So there, remember, we were stretching it out, pinching it out, and making it thinner. Now, it's still quite hot there. I'm going to make it a little bit curled at one end. So it curls up there. Not quite hot enough, but it's good enough to go. And think about if you were going to do that with a piece of clay or Play-Doh. So it curls. You can see how easy it is to curl that. And it's not because it's some incredibly soft metal. It's not. It's steel. It's as hard as any steel that you ever have. But when you heat it up, it's really soft. So I'm just grabbing another pair of tongs to hold it. So these are like pliers. Because one of the things that a lot of us, and it takes a long time to learn, when you're learning to blacksmithing, when I pull that out of the fire, no one is looking at my hand holding the tongs. You're looking at where it's hot. I mean, I'm looking at where it's hot. But if I can't hold it, I can't hit it. So it takes a long time to learn. This hand is actually doing an enormous amount. Most of the time, a blacksmith is hitting in one spot and moving the material around with your tongs, and you don't see that. So I make all sorts of different tongs to do different jobs. And this one is made so that I can hold the little curled end there easily and still hold the stock. So, and again, one of the endless jobs that a blacksmith does is makes their own tools for various things. And once I finish with this, getting this all together, I will make a series of tools that allows my apprentices or people that just don't have master level skill to be able to make it, because they'll go, oh, there is a jig, I can just heat that up and bend it into that shape and it will be the right shape, as opposed to having to do it by hand. So now we're going to do the other side. So now I've got 2 curls there. Let's make this a little fancy. Oddly enough, those little curls for this type of hook are not ornamental. They actually serve a function. And I'll show you what that function is when we're finished. So I am just making a simple S hook. It's a great thing to demonstrate, but it's probably something that the blacksmiths made by the thousands here. Because you don't have closets to hang your clothes in. You don't have drawers to put all of your cutlery in. You hang everything. So your cooking utensils will be hung by hooks around your fire. Your meat and geese and elk and deer and beef, when you go out and catch it, because they had beef here and you went out and shot it because they just let it warm free. You'd hang that from the ceiling of your home, or you'd use hooks for your logging or farming or your coats, and everything is hung by a hook of some kind. So blacksmiths made huge numbers of hooks. So this would have been, I'm sure, a daily task of the blacksmiths here at the fort, just making additional hooks. And you can see how soft it is, again, just by, I can twist it around there, no problem. And it just adds up. Now that's strictly, well, it's kind of decorative. If this was wrought iron, that would give it a little bit of structural strength, but it's not. And if I could hold that in my hands, I could have just tied that in a knot. So now we have the rough forging for our hook done, and we'll finish it off. So this is the blacksmith's workbench. Does anyone know what it's called? It's an anvil, you're right. And there's actually all sorts of different kinds and shapes of anvils. That is an anvil. It's called a swedge block. But this is a particular pattern of anvil. It's an English pattern anvil, and it's the one we all recognize as like, oh, that's an anvil. But there was thousands of different kinds of anvils. This one, I'm not quite sure why this one survived. Well, probably because the influence of the English on North America, but all countries had different anvils. Most of the anvils historically were just a big block of metal. They didn't have the tail or the horn. And that's what differentiates this from other types of anvils. German style of anvils don't have this flat bit, they have a triangle. Lots of them don't have this step down. Lots of them don't have the horn. They're just all kinds of different shapes. But it's called an English pattern, but it is an anvil. It's my workbench. And in my workbench is a couple of things. One, this horn, which helps me stretch metal out. And then a couple of holes, which lets me put any kind of tool that I want in there. So I want a tool that has a smaller horn on it than this. So I'm going to put that in there. This hole is called the Hardy hole, and that's called the Pritchell hole. And blacksmiths make all sorts of things to help them do their job. These are standard ones. It's just mandrels for shaping things, tools for cutting metal, tools for stretching it out, and this one's called the bickard. So we'll use this one, and we will just press this around here. Now that end isn't quite hot enough for my liking because it's not going to bend quite as easily. So there's our first curl for our hook.
Is that a fish hook that you're making?
Pardon me?
Is that a fish hook that you're making?
Oh, I'm going to make one more curl. It's going to be an S hook.
Oh.
So they little tiny fish hooks were quite tricky to make, and the blacksmiths could easily have made them. They did make some really big fish hooks here for sturgeon, but they made big fish hooks for sturgeon. But the sturgeon back then were massive. Like, it was not uncommon for the Hudson's Bay Company to buy from the Stolo people pieces of sturgeon. So they would buy pieces of sturgeon that weighed 300 kilos. A piece of a sturgeon that weighed that much. So you would have sturgeon that weighed well over 1,000 kilos, 1,500, and they were monstrous. And the Hudson's Bay Company had watched the indigenous people catching sturgeon, which was unusual because it's a huge long pole, and they thought, we'll just get the blacksmith to make a really big hook and we'll catch one. So the blacksmith made a bunch of hooks. The sturgeon just went right through them. They were big hooks. They would have been hooks like that, like massive, heavy hooks, and the sturgeon just. There is a record in, kind of a very somber record in the fort, of them watching someone fishing from two massive canoes, dugout canoes, together, and someone was fishing for sturgeon and had the line around the boat, and the sturgeon pulled both boats and the person right up under. So they were immense, incredibly strong. So the blacksmiths tried to make things like fish hooks, but they weren't really good enough. Or the sturgeon were much too big. So there we have our hook. So we'll give it a little brush, and you can still see it's still lots of heat in that hook, still really hot. Which is a time when I can take it and clean it up a little bit. I'm going to brush it because it helps remove any kind of loose scale, this black scale that's on it. And this black scale that you see down here, this stuff, that's why we're called blacksmiths. It's this material that comes off of iron and steel when it comes out of the fire. And what it is, it's an oxide, and you know what an oxide is because rust is an oxide. This kind of oxide doesn't eat the metal away. It forms a shell over the top, a very hard shell that resists rust, And because blacksmiths, remember, are not making beautiful things, they don't take the scale off. In fact, if I made this hook and made them like this regularly, just like you've seen me make it, and I took all of the scale off because I could grind it off or sand it off, they wouldn't call me a blacksmith. They'd call me a whitesmith because I took the scale off, because I'm doing decorative work. So that's a little bit hot, but we'll just cool it down there, and you can test this for me. Are you brave enough? Grab it with your fingers. So that is just a standard hook of the type that blacksmiths made by the thousands here at the fort. And all sorts of things, any other types of things that you see here. So you can pass that around if you want, so people can see it if you like.
Thank you.
You are welcome. It's my pleasure.
Thank you.